Oftentimes they have a great deal of difficulty being able to find gainful employment even after they're released. Fortunately, we have some programs like Probation Challenge that can help provide some transition for young people. But the best program that I believe we could be providing for young people is a decent education and a good job. That's the way to prevent people from going into the drug economy, which, as I said, is driving primarily the large growth of prison inmates here in the state of Illinois.
All right, we'll hold that thought because I have more questions on that topic. We'll be back with more right after this. Thank you. We're back. I'm Chinta Stausberg, host of the Strausberg Report, and my guest today, Illinois Senator Barack Obama, Democrat from the 13th Senatorial District. We were talking, Senator, about the problem of incarceration in Illinois and how it's growing.
Right.
There isn't really an incentive for lawmakers to change the law to provide more funding for education and job training because prisons are about jobs, contracts, and political clout.
Yeah, unfortunately, the state of Illinois, and this is true, I think, across the United States, prisons have become an economic development tool. In Illinois, it's primarily downstate economies that are being supported by the prison industry. And so what that means is that you get not only contractors, but also prison guards and employees of these facilities and entire communities that are really dependent on a prison economy. And I think that's unfortunate. These communities downstate are poor. They need help, just like urban areas in the north need help. But ultimately, a prison economy is not going to produce the kinds of economic growth and high-paying jobs that those communities really want and really need. And we'd be better served if we were putting more money into education, into job training, into economic development strategies that can sustain themselves over the long run. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping next year we're going to be able to do, because I'm optimistic that the Democrats are going to be able to recapture control of the Illinois Senate. And I think that will change the political mix in Springfield.
Is the Black Caucus together on this issue about funding education and job training programs for ex-felons?
Well, I think they are. As I said, I think there's a two-part strategy. I think that one strategy is to fund programs for ex-felons to help them transition back into the mainstream. The other strategy is prevention and intervention programs to make sure that young people don't get involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. I mean, we've got a situation now where anywhere from 1 to 4 to 1 to 3 African American males are at some point in their lives involved in the criminal justice system. That just doesn't make sense. And although we can set up a number of programs for ex-felons, our first step has to be to make sure that young people aren't getting involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. That means making our schools effective. That means providing the kinds of opportunities that would lead a young person to make a rational decision. You know, I can go into the drug economy and make a certain amount of money short term but end up in jail, or I can pursue my education, know that I can get a job that potentially supports my family. I think most young African American men and increasingly women are smart enough to make the right decision if they feel that they've got options. And the problem right now is that for a lot of them in the environment that they're in, they just don't see those options available to them. And that's something that we have to change.
I agree with you. Now, years ago, I did an investigation of some of the programs like Probation Challenge.
Right.
Couldn't get information how many clients they served. They would not tell me the recidivism rate,
Right.
And didn't want to tell me the funding.
Right.
With this program, Probation Challenge, it is 23, 24 years old. It services 2,238 clients a year.
Right.
It is state statutorily mandated.
Right.
Reverend Bailey still hasn't received his funding.
Right.
Senator Jones did get the governor to sign off on funds,
Right.
but your auditing department keeps playing games.
Right. Well, as I said, you know, this has not been an area that state government has put enough emphasis on. We're going to be pushing it further. We're going to have a situation next year where I anticipate Emil Jones, currently the minority leader of the Senate, will become the majority leader. That will give him enormous influence and power. He'll be one of the 3 most powerful people in Springfield, along with the governor and the House Speaker. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to transform some of these priorities. Now, one thing that I do have to say is that we've got a difficult budget situation in Springfield. And there are always different demands being made by different groups with respect to how the state spends its money. And so I think that it's going to be important for the community to also recognize that this needs to be a priority. Because a lot of times elected officials are essentially responding to what they hear from the community.
I see.
And if the community is not saying that this is a high priority, then oftentimes elected officials may give lip service to issues, but they won't necessarily push when they need to push.
But if the governor signs off, as he did to his credit, funds that were, these are last year funds, not this year's. You would think that that would be enough, and then having passed auditing several times, I don't understand.
Well, I'm not familiar with the particular problems that may be going on in terms of springing that money loose. I will say that right now, Illinois, and Illinois is not unique in this regard, is having some problems paying its bills on a timely basis and releasing money on a timely basis. We've got a huge cash flow problem in the state of Illinois. We just finished budget negotiations in Springfield last week. This has been the most difficult budget that I've had to deal with since I've been down in Springfield. We had a $1.3 billion deficit. This is the first time in 50 years that Illinois state government had less money this year than it did the previous year. That hasn't happened in 50 years.
And that's because of the 9/11.
Well, it's a combination of things. I think in part it's because the economy obviously took a hit after 9/11. Part of what happened also, though, is that Illinois, like many states across the country, had become very reliant on the tax income that came out of the huge amounts of money people were making on the stock market. Every time people sold off stock, the state of Illinois got a piece of the profit. And when the stock market crashed, it didn't, and really hasn't recovered as well as it should. What happened essentially was all that money that we were taking out of those transactions was lost. We're by no means in the worst shape. You've got states like California that have a $24 billion deficit. Even the state of Indiana, which is a much smaller state and a much smaller budget than Illinois, has a $1 billion budget deficit. So states across the country are experiencing these problems. We had to make some decisions about what programs to cut, where to raise taxes, but the problems aren't over, and it also means that unfortunately one of the things that's happened when you get a cash crunch like this is people the state starts paying its bills a little bit later.
11 months late?
That's exactly, well.
It's 11 months since this program.
11 months is not acceptable. And
Thank you very much.
And that doesn't have, my suspicion is that probably has less to do with cash flow issues than some of the issues you talked about with respect to audits and so forth.
Right.
But I do know that there are other vendors, and small businesses, I think, are the hardest hit, and a lot of non-for-profit social service agencies around the area who are really having problems paying their bills because the state is not paying them on time. And that's something that we've really got to get straight, because what we don't want to do is see small businesses and non-for-profits go under as a consequence of them not being paid on time after the state has entered into a contract with them.
So where are we now with the budget?
Well, what happened was essentially that we tried to fill the budget hole with a number of measures. We raised the cigarette tax by 40 cents. That goes into effect today, and that will bring in a little bit over $200 million into state coffers. The benefit of that is not only that we will increase revenues, but numbers of studies have shown that when you raise the cigarette tax substantially, potentially what that does is it discourages the number of young people who start smoking in the first place by as much as 13 to 15%.
Good.
And so that then saves you money in terms of long-term health costs associated with cigarette smoking. Second thing we did was we raised the casino tax, the tax on gaming in Illinois.
Good.
Which is, those have been extremely profitable. And whatever your feelings about gaming may be, and I tend to think that that's not a very good strategy for economic development. But
why not?
Well, I don't like the idea that we're making money on people gambling their money away.
But they're going to do it anyway.
Well, that may or may not be true. In the long term, I don't think that you want to have that as a core industry upon which the state is relying, in part because the more money the gaming industry makes, the more reliant we as a state government become on gambling to pay our bills, which gives them a lot more power over decision makers in Springfield than maybe they should have. So
how much does that yield?
So that will yield approximately $180 million over the next year.
And your deficit is
1.3. So we're not there yet. All right. So let me keep on going.
Okay.
So the other things that we transferred some surplus funds that were in various dedicated funds. For example, the road fund. Every year, a certain amount of money goes into the road fund. That's to construct roads across the state. But we don't always spend all the money that's in those funds. And so there are a number of funds like that where we transferred funding in. We still made significant cuts in a variety of areas. The governor essentially cut about 5% across the board in a lot of spending programs around the state. We restored some of the most critical cuts that were done to human services, but we still cut $200 to $300 million out of the budget. And finally, what we did then, and this has been the most controversial aspect of the budget, we essentially set up a system whereby the governor can draw down $750 million in bond money that is drawn from the tobacco settlement that was put in place a few years back nationally. Illinois gets a large share of that settlement, and essentially what we've done is we've said, if we have to borrow against those revenue streams of money that's coming in each year, that the governor is authorized to issue bonds to help cover the shortfall. There's one other thing I forgot to mention. One of the reasons we had a $1.3 billion budget deficit, about $600 million of that is the result of George Bush passing his tax cut bill a couple of years ago.
Oh, yes.
It did two things. One is it eliminated the estate tax. The estate tax is the money that very wealthy people pay on their estate when they die and pass on their estate to their children. Keep in mind that this only applies to the wealthiest, 1/10 of 1% of the population. Nevertheless, those rich folks have disproportionate power in Congress. They were able to push this through. They were able to label it as a death tax and really rally around the elimination of that, even though the average taxpayer never pays this tax whatsoever. Only 5,000 families in the country pay this tax. Because of that elimination, Illinois, which had its own estate tax tied to the federal tax, lost $400 million just off the bat. We then lost another $200 million as a consequence of a business tax break that the Bush tax cuts provided. What we were able to do was to decouple, meaning separate out the state collection of that business tax break from the federal collection of the business tax break. So as a consequence, we got $200 million back into the budget that we would have lost had we continued to not tax businesses according to federal law. So that saved us about $200 million. We couldn't get the estate tax reinstituted, so Illinois is still going to lose about $400 million as a consequence of that federal action.
Hold that thought. We'll be back right after this.